Here's Brody Brazil.
Well, the question here is pretty simple. Unfortunately, the answer is a lot more complex and complicated than that. Quite frankly, do I feel confident about the NHL starting their next season in January of 2021? At this juncture, here on the doorstep of December 2020, no, I don't exactly feel confident about it. Now, that's not to say that once the wheels get spinning and things get going that, everything won't be fine. I do believe that will be the case. Keeping it going for them probably won't be the hardest thing. Getting it started absolutely might be. Now, I want to be very clear here, very transparent. I don't know anything specific right now. I'm not basing what I'm saying here off of just one conversation or one observation or a rumor or a whisper. I'm not privileged with anything extra right now as I pass this along to you. I'm going on overall basic gut instinct about this ever-changing situation, right? And that's also important to mention here. From one day to the next, 1 week to the next, so many things happen in sports. So many things are happening in our world right now. And I think it's also obvious that not only are there multiple hurdles to jump over here, but there's also a couple moving targets. Things are constantly going to change. And front and center, the global pandemic seems like right now it's getting worse before it's getting better. Other sports leagues like the NBA, they're planning to start right around Christmas. Baseball is apparently on track for an on-time start next spring, but again, it's hard to know where our world is at right now. If we're seeing a surge, if we're seeing a turning point. You could tell me 5 different scenarios for the next 30 to 90 days, and quite honestly, I would not know which one to believe in or buy into most. So look, again, I don't want to be all doom and gloom here. It is very possible that everything gets underway in early 2021. Like maybe we're overthinking all of this. I'm just saying starting it is the hard part. And at this point, I have a lot more questions than answers. But I want to go over a couple different things, a couple different aspects that are not necessarily changing. And number one has to be this. The clock is ticking, whether you like it or not. If the aim is a 40-game season. Now, I say 40-game season like I think that's reasonable. I think that's doable. You start getting into 50, 60, and 70 in this short time frame, I really don't see how that's even logistically possible. There's a certain window in which this NHL regular season would need to be completed, a hard out, if you will, that the NHL has to be done with the Stanley Cup Final probably in mid to late July, right before the start of what is scheduled to be the 2021 Olympics in the summer in Tokyo, Japan. But there's also this, the hard out at the end, but you also have to consider that most every team is going to need at least 2, if not 3 weeks to ramp up for the current NHL regular season. And I say ramp up for 2 respects. Number one, you have to allow time for protocols and procedures to kick in, for everybody to get tested the right way, to ingest these players into your ecosystem and make sure that everybody is doing this safely. And not to mention, the other part of this is getting ready for a hockey season. I know players are skating and training right now, but unless you get them out there together on the ice in game situations for at least a 2-week time span, somebody's going to get hurt. You can't go from the speed of, a summer break to NHL Game 1 within 2 weeks and change. You really need, in my opinion, at least 3 weeks to do this properly. There's also a consideration with the schedule, as we talk about time ticking away, that the league is going to have to keep some open spaces in the schedule for contingencies. We saw what happened with baseball. There were a lot of makeup games. There were a lot of doubleheaders. We're currently seeing it with the NFL right now, and they only play 1 game a week per team, that days need to be shifted here and there. Can the NHL, if they're operating more on a normal schedule, a normal basis, how can they really afford to deal with games getting canceled? And then how can they catch up? Essentially, it's a domino effect. And if one team has an issue, and unfortunately the stats would suggest whether it's even a scare or something real, that is likely, how do you recover from that? How do you make the domino effect not completely take away teams from your season, and then the legitimacy overall of the season is compromised at a certain point if you can't actually keep the games going. Now, I say that in all fairness, health and safety is priority number one for me. I'm just saying if you're going to proceed with and go through with a season, if you don't do it the right way and you don't get things done in a right way, then what did you even do it for in the very first place? If you're asking me the best ways to get this done, and I know this has been discussed before with the schedule, I really do feel like playing series of games against opponents is prudent, instead of just flying to Anaheim for one game, flying to Dallas for the next game. Fly to Anaheim and play 2 against the Ducks. Fly to Dallas and play 2 against the Stars, and on and on. I really just feel like that minimizes travel, cuts down on hotel check-ins and players in public spaces more than they need to be. And also, if there's an issue, hey, give it 4 days in Dallas, or make sure that there's, pad on the beginning and end of your road trip so that you can move things around. You can make a lot more things work than trying to bounce around like normal. The other thing, too, is realignment is going to be real, in my opinion. Four divisions is how I would see it. And we also know that because of COVID, because of the pandemic, the border has become a very big deal and issue. The Blue Jays couldn't play baseball this summer in Canada. The NBA's Toronto Raptors are relocating to Florida for their upcoming season. And so with 7 teams from Canada in the NHL, it only seems right that they would have their own division in Canada. So 7 teams there, which actually kind of works out well. 7 teams in Canada, and then the rest of the 24 would be 8, 8, and 8. 8 in the West, 8 in the Central, and 8 out East, geographically speaking. But yeah, the West might even have, a St. Louis or a Minnesota in it. So there you go. The clock is definitely ticking. Also this, different objectives between the players and between the actual NHL. And this is not to place blame on either side or one side. This is also not to further the divide that already exists between players and the league. But this is a very complicated scenario. Even in normal times, you understand these two sides, they don't necessarily agree. But now think about all the new rules that have to be put in place, all the new protocols that have to be practiced and followed in a very disciplined way. All the payment. I mean, how do you structure out payment in the course of a modified and shortened season? What does everybody get? How do you cut the pie up? Essentially, that's not an easy conversation, and a schedule like nobody has ever seen before. And we've already had this league endure lockouts and labor stoppages, but this is a totally, totally different beast. And everybody has to be on the same page. NHL home arenas, are they going to start empty? Will some of them include fans if it seems right? Will some of them get their fans back over the course of the season if the situation gets right? How do you integrate that? How do you integrate that in a fair way? Is it a home ice advantage if one team does have fans, others don't? What's clear to me is, and we saw this with baseball too, both sides between the players and the league, I'm talking about the teams, they want similar end results. They all want to be playing. They all want games for a lot of respective reasons. But the rub and the problem is they all need it on their respective terms, or most things on their respective terms. For the players, obviously, they want enough games and enough salary to make the risk they're about to take to actually make it a reward. On the flip side, the league is looking at this and saying, there's only one way to do this, and that's in a responsible way. But not only that, a financially responsible way. And I think the obvious aspects of that. I don't need to get into it, but both sides have their interests, and money is at a certain respect of it. But also now in a pandemic, safety is even more paramount than all of that. And again, the legitimacy of doing this season, what is it all for? How will it be viewed at the very end? Legitimate or not? And there have been talks this whole time between the Players Association and the league, and as we've understood lately, those have kind of stalled out. I don't know how much exactly I'd be reading into that right now. But aside from all of that, the clock is ticking. And that was an earlier point here. The clock is ticking on these two sides to get something done. And if you recall baseball season, this past summer, the two sides were having a very difficult time. They agreed on so much. And then they finally got into the hitch of money and the logistics of how exactly to pull this off. And the commissioner of baseball actually had to instate the season between the two sides. He basically had to force it through to happen. I hope that's not the case with the NHL, but certainly there's going to have to be something and somebody in the middle to pull all of this together. So again, different objectives between the players and the league. That is certainly an ongoing, but it's also an expected issue. And then the last thing I want to talk about here, because I understand there's been some pessimism here in this video so far, is there are some things I do feel confident about with the NHL if they can get things started. And that's a big thing for me here. It's not a matter of can they keep it going, like I said. It's just how can you get this started? How can you go from zero to something at some certain point that works in your time frame? I do feel confident about this. Hockey, for better or worse, carries a huge culture of discipline. And what I mean by that is, if you tell players, here are the rules, you have to follow these for yourself, for your teammates, for the safety of your coaches and your family. It's no disrespect to baseball players, basketball players, football players, or any other profession across the globe, but hockey players do have a certain work ethic and discipline, and maybe it's a level of respect that I'm not going to say is in every example is better than every other sport, but across the board, generally speaking, I think hockey's going to do very well with existing outside the bubble for the first time. Because you remember, they already finished their last season, but they did it in such a manner where they were very much protected, they were very much isolated, and the risk they took was relatively low inside these bubbles. That's going to be a totally different thing this time around. And baseball players who just finished their season will tell you that the level of responsibility and discipline and accountability for each other has to be at an all-time high. It really is not about what these players are doing at the practice rink, on the team airplane, on a bus to the hotel. It's more about what they're doing with their free time. On off days, on home days, where you're free to basically do whatever you want. In the road cities, it's all about the time actually away from the rink. And again, I do feel like the discipline of hockey players is really going to keep them safe, each other safe, and keep the product going. And then the other thing I really do feel confident about with the NHL is the creative aspect, in a sense that they are obviously going to have to figure out alternative plans for a playoff format, like I said, for realignment, for a totally different looking schedule and structure. But that's always been a strong point of the NHL, is to be able to be flexible under uncertain circumstances, make something work, make something intriguing. Look what they did even with getting restarted in the bubble. I think the presentation of the product, the legitimacy again of the product was very good. I think people respect how the Stanley Cup was won and the teams that ultimately got there in the end, and just the competitive nature of it. So this isn't the first time that the league has kind of had their backs up against the wall and needing to come out with some options that work for players, teams, and fans. I know they will do a great job with this. It's just only a matter of if they can get the boat out of the dock. I really do feel like then they can get places. So look, as of right now, this is largely a matter of the waiting game. And a lot of us are trying to figure out what happens next. How does this happen? What makes sense? I'm just telling you, the main message here is I don't feel great about the situation right now, but I do feel confident that if they can get it going, once it does get going, everything will be just fine. Want to remind you that I'm all over social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Hit me up on those respective platforms. And don't forget to download the podcast. It's available through Apple, Spotify, and Google Play. Now, if you like this video, let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts. Do you agree, disagree? Tell me what you have to say. And until next time, be safe out there.